Little Lizzie. Little Lizzie lived on a farm. She spent almost all of her time walking about the barnyard, seeing to the chickens, milking the cows, and stacking the bales of hay. Molly, Susie, and Tilly worked the farm too, of course, but somehow managed to busy themselves all day with merely looking busy and doing nothing instead. Lizzie worked throughout the day and often heard Molly, Susie, and Tilly laughing and chatting instead of working. But being the youngest and newest milkmaid, Lizzie had no choice if she wanted to earn her keep. Lizzie loved the animals dearly. She cared for them with a deep love and made sure to give them the best to eat and the tidiest barn in which to lie. One afternoon, just before sundown, Lizzie found Molly asleep behind the barn door. Having done very nearly nothing all day, Lizzie wondered how Molly could possibly be so tired and continued to clean around her.
"Ah, will you stop that sweeping right now? Can't you see I'm trying to sleep?"
yelled Molly, and rolled over and continued snoring. Lizzie hastened on to the little pond to feed the ducks. There sat Susie, braiding little flowers into her hair.
"Aren't they just lovely?"
asked Susie. Lizzie stared in disbelief. Who had been tending the chickens if Susie sat braiding her hair?
"Susie, have you gathered the chickens' eggs yet?"
asked Lizzie.
"There'll be just as many tomorrow. I'll gather them then,"
said Susie, and continued picking flowers. Lizzie made her way back to the chicken coop, knowing that their master hated the chickens sitting on eggs longer than needed, and she scooped the eggs from the nests and set out to the barn to check on the cows. To her surprise, Lizzie found a bucket of milk half filled and gathering flies, with Tilly nowhere to be seen. Tossing out the curdled milk, Lizzie sat down to finish the incomplete task. After what seemed like 3 days' worth of work on one day alone, Lizzie sat down to eat her dinner, and on her plate she found a lone seed, one with which she was unfamiliar. Not bothering why or how it landed on her plate, she popped it into her pocket and went to bed. The next day, at the farm, Lizzie made many inquiries as to what seed it might be. She found it was a wheat seed, and that, if planted, it would grow, and when ripe, it could be made into flour, and then into bread. When she discovered that, she knew it ought to be planted. She was so busy doing her work, and the work of the others, that, naturally, she thought she did not have the time to plant it. So she thought of Molly, who had all the time in the world, and of Susie, who had nothing to do, and of Tilly, with her idle hours, and she called loudly,
"Who will help me plant the seed?"
But Molly said,
"Not I."
and Susie said,
"Not I."
and Tilly replied, "Not I."
"Well then,"
said little Lizzie,
"I will."
and she did. Little Lizzie went on with her daily duties through the long summer days, feeding the chickens and ducks, cleaning out the horses' stalls, milking the cows, and all while Tilly chatted with the hired ploughman, and Susie played near the pond, and Molly napped in every corner she could find, and the wheat grew tall and ready for harvest. One day, Lizzie chanced to notice how large the wheat was, and that the grain was ripe. So she ran about, calling briskly,
"Who will help me cut the wheat?"
Molly said,
"Not I."
Susie said,
"Not I."
and Tilly said, "Not I,"
"Well, then,"
said Lizzie,
"I will."
and she did. She got the sickle from among the farmer's tools in the barn, and proceeded to cut down her enormous wheat stalk. On the ground lay the nicely cut wheat, ready to be gathered and threshed. But the chickens and ducks and cows all sang out in chorus their dissatisfaction with Lizzie's endeavours, demanding attention for themselves. Poor little Lizzie! She felt quite overwhelmed and hardly knew where to turn. Her attention was sorely divided between her duties on the farm and her duty to the wheat, for which she felt responsible. So again, in a very hopeful tone, she called out,
"Who will help me thresh the wheat?"
But Molly, with a yawn, said, "Oh, not I." And Susie, with a song, said,
"Not I."
And Tilly, with a grunt, said,
Not I.
So little Lizzie, looking, it must be admitted, rather discouraged, said,
"Well, I will then."
And she did. Of course, she saw to all her duties on the farm first, and then went out and threshed the wheat. Then she called out,
"Who will help carry the wheat to the mill to be ground?"
Turning around, Molly said,
"Not I."
and Susie said,
"Not I."
and Tilly said.
Not I.
So good little Lizzie could do nothing but say,
"I will then."
and she did. Carrying the sack of wheat, she trudged off to the distant mill. There she ordered the wheat ground into beautiful white flour, and then carried the sack all the way back to the farm to complete her day's work. After this really strenuous day, Lizzie retired to her soft hay bed earlier than usual, well before the colours of dusk came into the sky. She would have liked to sleep late in the morning, but her chicks, joining in the morning chorus of the henyard, drove away all hopes of such luxury. Even as she sleepily half opened one eye, the thought came to her that today the wheat must somehow be made into bread. She was not in the habit of making bread, although, of course, anyone can make it if he or she follows the recipe with care, and she knew perfectly well that she could do it if necessary. So, after the chickens were fed, the eggs gathered, the cows milked, and the ducks taken out to the pond, she hunted up Molly, Susie, and Tilly. Still confident that they would surely help her some day, she sang out,
"Who will help make the bread?"
Alas for little Lizzie! Once more her hopes were dashed, for Molly said, "Not I." Susie said,
"Not I."
and Tilly said,
Not I.
So Lizzie said once more,
"Then I will."
and she did. Feeling that she might have well known all the time that she would have to do it herself, she marched back into the servants' quarters kitchen. First of all, she set the dough, as was proper. When it was time, she brought out the baking tins, moulded the bread, divided it into loaves, and put them into the oven to bake. All the while, Susie sat lazily by, giggling to herself. Close at hand, Tilly stretched and played with her hair. In the distance could be heard the long-drawn snores of Molly dozing. At last the great moment arrived. A delicious fragrance wafted on the autumn breeze. Everywhere the barnyard citizens sniffed the air with delight. Lizzie ambled her way toward the source of all this excitement. Although she appeared to be perfectly calm, in reality she could only, with difficulty, restrain an impulse to dance and sing, for had she not done all the work on this wonderful bread? Small wonder that she was the most excited person in the barnyard. She did not know whether the bread would be fit to eat, but joy of joys! When the lovely brown loaves came out of the oven, they were done to perfection. Then, probably because she had acquired the habit, she called out,
Who would like to eat some bread?
Everyone in the barnyard was watching hungrily and smacking their lips in anticipation. And Molly said,
Ooh, I will.
and Susie called out,
I will.
and Tilly shouted,
I will.
but little Lizzie said,
No, you won't. I will.
and she did.